Underbidding is killing your profits, and you know it. I'm about to show you the exact estimating template that I've used to eliminate guesswork and protect my margins. Watch this before you estimate your next project. All right, so I'm going to be going through this step by step how to put together a new home build estimate, all the different items, tips, tricks, what you should be thinking about, some common mistakes to avoid, and all that. So let's dive right in. I'm using Contractor Foreman in this example for the software. Whatever project management software you have will be fine. If you're using a spreadsheet, you can do that as well. Although I'd suggest picking up some software. I like Contractor Foreman. You can also look at Build Exact is good, as well as Job Tread. Those are kind of my three top picks. If you're looking at software, go get a demo and check those out. So this is a template that I provide to clients and that you can get as well if you want. There is a link in the description below this video. So go click in the link and you can go and download this exact template. It's going to be in a CSV file, which is like a spreadsheet, like a basic spreadsheet style, which you can then upload to any estimating software. Essentially should be able to upload it with the data and it'll pull it into your system, whatever it is. So super easy. Go grab that and work with me here through this estimate. So the way that I like to structure my estimates is you've got your different phases. So typically you're always going to start with pre-construction, then you'll move into demolition, excavation, concrete, framing, and we'll be going through the different phases. And then within each phase, you're going to have all your different line items. You're probably kind of familiar with this, but this is a great way to structure it. Templates are so helpful for a number of reasons. First, it saves you a ton of time because it's already built out. Second of all, it's going to help you not forget things. Because if you're kind of doing things from scratch or pulling it from another job, there may be things in that job that you deleted or didn't add that this job has. Template's just much more all-inclusive and able to give you like a big view of the project, and then you just delete out whatever you want. So pre-construction phase, typically this is going to include things like architectural, interior design, structural engineer, geotech, all that kind of stuff. Environmental testing, if you've got to get any kind of testing done on the property, if you're doing like a tear down or something like that, you're going to need a bunch of different testing going on. That would all go in the pre-construction. Even if you are just sort of bidding on the building part and they're working with a design somebody else, you still need some pre-construction because you're still going to be spending money on some of this stuff, as you just want to make sure that even if you're not like if they're doing this, or the architect or whoever's taking care of some of this stuff, you still want it as a line item with a zero cost and just saying not included, not applicable, to be supplied by others, so that it's very clear and that it's not later. I thought you were doing this. No, we didn't have this in our quote. Well, why not? And so stuff like that outlined specifically. Another thing that's often missed is a project management pre-construction. So if you have a PCSA and you do this whole pre-construction process, your design builders, this is all going to be straightforward and pretty standard stuff. If not, you definitely need to have some pre-construction time in there for your project manager or yourself, because you're going to need to talk to the city or the county for permitting. You're going to need to talk with the architects, the designers. You're going to have to get some budgeting in place with estimating. You're going to have to talk with sub trades and all this stuff to plan the project that you need hours. So I would say on a new home build, typically for pre-construction, anywhere from 20 to 40 hours, probably, when it's all said and done. If you're actually tracking your time, how much time it takes you to plan a project and do all this pre-construction, you'd probably be surprised at the amount of hours it's going to take. So you want to make sure that that's taken care of. And then any kind of insurances you have, contingency could also go in here if you've got a contingency. I put it later on, but some people have it right up top. All right, next is demolition. If it's an empty lot and there's no demo, no worries. If you're doing like a tear down or something, you would need this. I include in demo, like, you got your porta potty, if you got termite pre-treat or any kind of like stuff like that. Site setup would also be in here, as far as, if you got fencing or whatever, garbage bins, put that in the demolition and site prep phase. After that, you got excavation. Now, excavation, as you probably know, is very variable. Unless you're building somewhere where it's like in a field somewhere and it's just dirt and maybe if the odd rock or two, you can estimate what it's going to cost for excavation pretty easily. If you're building in like rocky terrain, or you've got ravines or water sheds nearby or whatever, then you want to put very clearly, this is a risk and this is like an allowance. So always be very clear what's allowances and what's, hard pricing. And excavation is definitely one of those things where if you have any concerns about what's underneath the soil, because you never know what you could find, old oil tanks or who knows what, and it's going to cost a bunch of extra money, right? You don't want to necessarily put a fixed price on the excavation unless you're very certain that this is, you've built here before, or there's houses next door that, the soil, what's underneath and all that stuff. Other than that, I mean, you've got your connections. One other thing with the pre-construction is just I often do permits not included, and as well as city upgrades, depending where you are. But if you need to upgrade the sewer or electrical or whatever, that's typically, again, depends on your area. But if it's like some sort of thing that you've got to pay the county or the city, then you don't know how much that's going to cost. So there's no use putting a price in there, right? Plus, it's kind of nice to leave a few things out if you're unsure of the cost or someone else probably is going to handle like it, like, government wise, because it's going to make your estimate look a little bit more affordable, right? So you know that there's going to be some cost here. You're going to tell the client, hey, this could be anywhere from ten to $30,000 extra if you need, additional upgrades, or permits could be anywhere from five to $15,000. We don't really know that. So things like that, they're aware of it, but you don't necessarily need to have a price in there. Again, you can do allowance if you want, depends on you, but some things it's kind of like nice to have the item but kind of leave out of there because it brings the price of the whole project. It looks kind of smaller, even though you know that when you get to the finish line, there's going to be those additional costs. All right, so that's that. Excavation, talked about that. Foundation and concrete. A bunch of this stuff's pretty straightforward. I am not going to be going over like takeoffs. That's kind of a whole nother beast, if you will. If you want a specific video on how to do takeoffs for a new home build or construction project, comment below and just let me know, hey, takeoff video or something like that. Just comment takeoff and I will create a video specifically for takeoffs. Be happy to help you out there. Use like digital takeoff software and show you how to do takeoffs. Otherwise, these are kind of the big items that I've got. You got your footings, you got your foundation walls, if slabs. Generally, if you do basements, it's a basement slab, or it could be, slab on grade. If you don't do basements, but you're just kind of working off of, off the ground, driveways, walkways, and then concrete pumping is one people often forget. If your contractor is supplying that or not, or includes it, but if you need a pump truck or something to come out, or if you know that this is like a remote type job and it's going to cost you a bunch to get trucks out there or whatever, you got to put some extra price in there. Carpentry is often the most material heavy kind of part of the estimate that I find. So labor, generally just square footage price. You probably know what your subcontractors are charging for labor price, or if you got in-house framers, then you can figure that out. Stairs is often one that I find you want to put extra in because stairs can be varied, as well as they don't really incorporate stairs into the square footage price very well because, again, you don't know how many stories it is, what kind of stairs they're going to have, all that kind of stuff. Having the crane show up, that could be for cranes for beams, cranes for truss package, whatever it may be. And then for me, I like to do my wall lumbers. When you got digital takeoffs, you can kind of like, figure out your walls, and you need to figure out your walls anyways for drywall and like other measurements and baseboards. So doing a takeoff for like wall lengths is helpful. You may as well get your framing takeoff lumber from it to build some accuracy instead of just doing like a square footage. You can do that. I know people that do, where it's just like, we got a 2,000 square foot home, charge, I don't know what it may be, X amount of dollars per square foot for framing package, and that's their material pricing. That's a pretty type of pricing, especially when you've got like highly custom, or if you got tall walls and open floors and stairwells and different things like that. So I find it's a lot more accurate if you can do your 2x4 and 2x6 wall lumber. Hardware packages, lumber packages, again, if you want to do a lumber package, if it's just like a basic bungalow, you can definitely run a lumber package on that. Sheeting, plywood, OSB, window door header material is another one you can throw in there. Your beam lumber, it could be if you got steel beams, you definitely want to have that in there for structural components. Joisting, I like to have like a floor package for the joist. Could be joist and floor. You got your floor sheeting and stuff. Truss package, always some miscellaneous I'm a framer by trade. There's you could buy a billion two by fours, you're still going to be three short by the end of the job. So always account for some sort of miscellaneous because you're going to be short on material. There's going to be something that needs to get picked up, and nails, saw blades, whatever, right? So always have some good miscellaneous framing materials in there. And then any specialty stuff. You got fireplaces, tall walls, niches, arches, any kind of funky kind of framing stuff, tray ceilings, that kind of stuff. You want to make sure you bump up and have some additional pricing for those kind of extra specialty features. Roofing, very straightforward. Forward. Typically, most homes, asphalt shingles. If you've got some sort of solar panels or other things that's probably going to go in the electrical, but add the extra stuff in there. One thing you could do for roofing is have an allowance for the type of material if you wanted a separate labor and material price because they may want upgraded shingles. I would typically just say this is base standard pricing for standard shingles. If you want upgrades, that would be more or whatever. Typically speaking, when you're going through this process, the way that I like to run it is like typically you'll have like some sort of ballpark calculator, which is probably just a spreadsheet, or it could be a template like this where it's like maybe you got 5 to 10 numbers you put in, and it'll give you a ballpark scope or like scale of like, this is $1 million home or this is $1.3 million home or whatever. And then you can give that to your client very easily and right away know, is this budget worth pursuing? Or do we need to go back to the drawing board? Or are we not the right fit for this client because they're looking for something a lot cheaper, right? So typically that can kind of weed out a bunch of people. And then what I'm doing now would be like the rough estimate. So this is something if you have a nice template like this, you're working from base numbers, you could probably throw something together like this on a new home build in an hour or less. And this is just kind of like to give them a really rough estimate. It's going to show a lot of detail because you've got the template, it's going to have all the numbers in there, but you let them know like this is sort of like kind of the base pricing. And then from there, you sign a pre-construction service agreement, and they can then get their selections, you can get bids, you're getting paid for your time, you can put more time into getting the details right, all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of the process behind this. All right, so back to the estimating here. A really important tool is always having a good cup of coffee when you're estimating, is what I find. Helps you blaze through the numbers a little quicker and keeps you on point. All right, pencil sharp if you want. Windows and exterior doors, again, you're just doing counts on this. If you got takeoff software, you just click in the numbers, 10 windows, boom. If you've got like sliding doors, you typically want to do like a lineal foot for sliding doors, especially if they're large patio doors or something like that, or the ones that fold out or something. Also, if you've got really large windows, I'll sometimes just double count those and just to like get the pricing accurate. So if you got something like here, like window supply, I don't know, I've got, oh, unit cost $20 because I'm doing square footage. So you can do square footage on windows as well if you want more accuracy, or you can do each. Another thing on windows, which I've made the mistake of before, and I know a lot of other people have because I've reviewed a lot of estimates, is forgetting about the installation costs. So sometimes the supplier will install them, which is nice. I like that method because then the warranty is with the supplier, with the installation as well. But often you can get a window package, 25 grand for windows, and you put that in there, and then you realize, oh, I forgot that we need to install them, or I need to get my installer, install them. That's another 2 grand or whatever, and you don't have it in your estimate, right? So make sure you've got window installation. All right, sliding glass patio door, like I mentioned, lineal footage, and garage doors. Make sure you remember your garage doors. You'll have your base price if it's something with like windows or special design or colors or whatever. You'll have to bump it up. Typically speaking, though, this is a rough one, so you're just going to run through it pretty quickly, put in your numbers, do your takeoffs, and get it done fairly quick. And then inside everything, you always want to make sure that you have, custom styles, colors, windows, etc., would increase the price. So you always want to be clear that this is kind of base pricing. This is for kind of standard stuff. If you want something super special, then, cost can go up and will go up. All right, HVAC. Going to depend on your location and if you guys normally install heat pumps or furnaces or whatever's out nowadays, thermal, geothermal, all that kind of stuff. But anyways, you'll have your base pricing in here. Remember, hood range ducting, the hood range exhaust fans, stuff like that can often get missed, which all these things, it's like, oh, it's only $600, right? But at the end of the day, that's, 600 bucks plus the markup. Plus you forget a couple of those and it's easy to, to lose thousands of dollars without having something built out like this. Plumbing and gas, I got to run through a bunch of the stuff, but just remembering, essentially on takeoffs, you're just going to be checking how many sinks do we have, got a water heater, how many toilets. You pretty much just do numbers for all this stuff, showers and all that kind of stuff as well. Gas fitting, so you got barbecue, gas fitting outside or outdoor fireplace, gas fireplace. Remembering that those exterior elements is important. Electrical can be a little bit hard to get accurate, rough budget is what I've found anyways, partially because there's a fair like range of pricing you'll get from electricians, but also because there's just a lot that goes into electrical from, how far wires are being run and all the different components of the project, how many lights there are, all that kind of stuff. So it can get pretty varied. But typically speaking, if you've got it built out like this, where you've got kind of a square footage price for your labor and wiring, that's normally stays the same. And then your recessed lighting and your different lightings and stuff like that can be in there. Alarm system, that's something I like, unless they specifically have it on the plans. I wouldn't add a bunch of stuff. You want to keep the price lower and very basic for the rough budget because you don't want to scare them off. You want as little sticker shock as possible. And then it's a lot easier to build from there, right? If working with them, you got the PCSA signed and it's like, okay, you want the updated tile, that's an extra $1,000, $2,000, no big deal, right? Oh, you want an alarm system, 3 grand. Well, we can throw that in, right? And that, $1 million house now is like after you've drilled it down and they've done their selections, now they're maybe at 1.2 million, which you kind of know from the get-go it's probably going to cost that much by the time you add everything in. But at least you're able to work through that iterative process and they kind of see how their decisions are driving the additional costs instead of you just coming out, this is going to be 1.2 million. Well, another contractor said he could do it for 900,000, so we're going to go talk with them more, right? And then you kind of lose a job or whatever. So you want to keep it economically friendly in the rough budgeting. And then once you have PCSA, sky's the limit and, they can go nuts as far as they want. But as long as they understand that this is your decision and that's why the price is going higher. It's not that the contractor is just trying to make an extra $300,000 on your project. That's how much it's probably going to cost at the end. But you got to start from a base. All right. You catching me here? All right. So exterior finishing, pretty basic. You got your siding, masonry and stucco as well, depending on what kind of siding you're putting in. Gutters and eaves trough is an easy one to forget, so want to make sure that's in there, as well as exterior trims. I've seen people forget that as well, and that's not a fun one either. That's going to be thousands, tens of thousands, depending on the trim packages and stuff that they're using. So you want to make sure that that's in there. And masonry stucco. So stucco, you got to know if you're doing like just typical or acrylic. Nowadays, I think most people are just doing acrylic, but you need to know that if there's different types of stone, obviously, different types of stucco siding. Again, make it be known. I don't know if I've got it in here, but yeah, so significant price difference between standard stucco and acrylic stucco. So you want to have all this information in there for one thing, because clients want to do work with people that are detailed. Even if the client is not detailed and they're like, just tell me what it's going to cost. And like, I just want something that looks good or whatever. They're not detailed people. They're still going to appreciate a very high level of detail in their estimates because it makes you look like a professional. And there's all this stuff like, oh, I didn't know there's two different types of stucco that I could get, or, what's the difference between this? Or, oh, I didn't know that excavation could be a risk factor. And it's like, yeah, we just did a project last year and there's a giant hole there and it, costs an extra 10 grand, not to scare you, but that kind of stuff can come up. So we will always tell you ahead of time. And you got to play the field a little bit and not scare them off. But at the same time, you want to be that trusted contractor, not the everything is rainbows and unicorns. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything. There's going to be no hiccups. There's no dust. There's no sound. This is going to be a straightforward, easy project and all that stuff, right? You don't want to just be that fairy tale contractor that life is, perfect and everything good, because anybody who's worth their salt is going to know that, or you should be educating them at least that, construction's messy. There are things that come up. You're in good hands. We're going to take care of you. But, stuff happens, right? And if other contractors are telling you different, they're probably just telling you what you want to hear because it's not real world stuff, right? All right. So insulation, pretty basic. You fill the walls up and the roof and you're good to go. You got your different insulations there. You do that. Sheetrock as well. I've definitely made mistakes on sheetrock, drywall, whatever you want to call it. And you got to make sure that you're getting your wall surfaces, your ceiling surfaces, all those kind of things. If you got tall walls, nooks and crannies, whatever it may be, it's easy to miss. I've missed insulate or ceiling drywall before, and I had to have a very difficult conversation with the client as to why we were a couple of $1,000s short at least because I had forgotten to do proper takeoffs. Luckily, we're doing kind of cost plus pricing, so they ended up paying for it. They understood. Still had an amazing experience with the client. Sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and tell them you made a mistake and try to work it out and make the cost as small as possible for them. But if you're eating that, it sucks. All right, interior finishing carpentry. Because you've done your takeoffs up to this point in your estimating software or your takeoff software, pretty easy to run the trims you need. Typically, what I'll do is I'll count the windows and doors and like, so a typical window I would say is, I don't know, maybe 16 lineal foot. Of course, you're always going to have like extra for waste or whatever. But let's say a typical window is 4 by 4 feet. So you've got 16 lineal feet of trim potentially. If you've got like certain saddle or like sashes or whatever, like different design for the base of the windows. Of course, you got to take that into account. But typically with rough budgeting, you're doing basic. And then if they ask for additional details or whatever, then you'd add those in. If you're working for plans and you can easily see that they've got a lot of detail on your trim, bump it up a little bit, make it like you don't want to be negligible here as like we totally ignored the plans and just went with what we thought would be the lowest price possible, right? Go towards the plans, but don't spend a ton of time overthinking it. Yeah, you get your doors, attic access door again. It's only $200 or whatever it may be, but a lot of people don't remember you're going to need an attic access at some point, and it's going to cost you a little bit of money to buy it and install it. Railings, of course, and all that kind of stuff. Painting, pretty straightforward. If you've done your drywall takeoffs, your painting takeoffs are the same. Essentially, millwork. So this is all your cabinetry, your vanities, all that kind of stuff. Closet organizers are another thing that can often get missed or not accounted for. Walk-in closets, typically that's going to be with your millwork package, or maybe you got a closet guy that does that stuff. So you should kind of know a lineal footage. But closet organizer is just, your shelf with your bar or, some basic whatever stuff to hang your shirts or whatever. It's not a lot, but if you've got like 10 closets in the house, it's going to add up, right? So you got to make sure you're accounting for that. And then all your handles, your knobs, your pulls, all that kind of stuff. Again, maybe they're $4, $10 a pop, but it all adds up when you got a big house. Countertops, pretty straightforward. Tile is another one where there's a lot of detail. And I always break out tile by installation and material supply. And the reason for that is because of allowances. When you go to selections, they're going to be choosing the tile. Typically, they're going to want some nice tile. Not always, but if you've budgeted, I don't know, in this case, I've got $10 a square foot, which I think is pretty healthy, but maybe they want $20 per square foot tile, right? So that's why having it broken out by labor and materials whenever you can is advisable if they're going to be selecting the final finishes and stuff like that. So definitely want to be breaking those out. And then you got all your different tile areas, floor, surrounds, backsplashes, all that kind of stuff. In-floor heating, unless it specifically says it on the plan again, just kind of leave it at zero, but leave it in there because they will probably want that. And then it's easy for you just to go like, yeah, no problem. We'll add it to the 2 bathrooms or 3 bathrooms or whatever they want it for. All right. So moving on, still with me here. Estimating is a little bit tedious and tiresome. The benefits of getting this in place, one, you're going to make better money. You're not going to forget things. You'll be more accurate. Two, you're getting a system in place here that you can eventually not have to estimate again. And you can be like, here, pass it off to your project manager, your estimator, whoever you're going to hire to take care of this. But the better you can make templates in your system and what you're doing, the easier you're going to be able to pass it on and delegate it to someone else so that you don't have to spend your evenings and weekends and spare time running through estimates and doing this. So kudos to you for taking the time to sharpen your axe before you cut down the tree and learn how to, get these proper estimates and templates in place. Like I said, this whole template that I have here, check out the description below. There is a link there. You can go get access to this specific templates in a CSV format spreadsheet that you can load into your project management estimating software, whatever it is, and it's got all of these details in there. Of course, you have to customize it. Don't rely on this pricing because this pricing is just whatever basic generic stuff, right? Put in your own pricing. You can put in quantities, even if you know that you have similar quantities, although I probably wouldn't do that. But unit costs, you can definitely put those in there. You got your glass and your mirrors, so shower doors, the mirrors, that kind of stuff. Appliances, I like to have install in there, so you have your own person installing, but I would prefer the clients purchase their own appliances, typically speaking, or you can have it two ways, but I wouldn't put appliances in the estimate. First of all, it's going to raise your estimate by a couple $1,000s at least. So it's easier and nicer if you don't have it in there. And that way the client can go shopping or you refer them to your appliance sales rep or whoever. They figure it out, they get it ordered, they pay for it, and they tell you when it's getting shipped, or you arrange shipping with your project manager and the company to coordinate that. So fireplace, gas, electric, whatever it may be. You got those in there, window coverings, blinds, something people forget, and they can cost a lot, especially when you got like electric blinds and some of that fancy stuff that they got nowadays. Your decks, your pergolas, outdoor features, all that kind of stuff, landscaping. Yeah, just running off the plans. Sometimes the plans aren't going to have like the whole lot plan. If you don't have that, you're just kind of doing your best guess here, and you'd probably do contingencies or have like this is an allowance for landscaping, and we got like a $40,000 landscaping allowance because often people won't necessarily have a nice landscaping plan as well, or not really know what they want if they just have like architectural drawings. They're usually like they know the house, the yard, and the property. They're not too sure on exactly what they want. So rough budgets just have like an allowance in there for that. All right, so we're nearing the end, and this is where there's a lot of like missed things that people often have, and where you can lose money because you need to have some contingency or some miscellaneous stuff in there because as you know, every construction project there's going to be something that comes up or something that you didn't account for. So site maintenance and cleanup. You're going to need a guy there probably every day, every couple of days to be cleaning the site and, just tidying up whatever it may be. Put that in there. Miscellaneous labor. So those odd things, it happens. I've been through this struggle and I help clients with this struggle a lot of like, I've got all these sub trades, but I end up like myself or one of my guys, I always got to send them to go like clean something up because this trade didn't quite finish what they're doing or it's not in their scope of work. You should tighten those gaps so that every part of the project is covered by a sub trade. But inevitably, there comes up something that's just out of place or unaccounted for, and you need to send somebody to go fix it. Or heaven forbid, you have to go fix it, which you should have someone to do that. You should have a handyman or a labor person. But either way, some miscellaneous labor, miscellaneous materials for contingency for things that got forgotten about. Your floor protection, rentals, if you got to rent equipment or whatever, your cleaning, and then any deliveries, you're going to have to pay for some sort of deliveries here and there. And then the final thing that a lot of people don't do properly is don't have project management. For a new home build, you're probably going to have anywhere from 200 to 300 hours potentially of project management time. And if you're just accounting for that in your markup, you're probably losing money. And you also don't know how long it's taking you to do your project. So you can't pass it off to a project manager effectively. You don't know how many hours you're going to have to pay them for the project. And you're not tracking things properly. So have your project management time in there. How much time is it going to take you to do this project? The good way to figure that out is if you figure you're probably going to spend 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, then how long is this project? So new home build take, let's say, 8 months. With pre-construction, maybe it's longer, but you've got your pre-construction time already. So let's say 8 months, you're going to have 20 working days a month, typically speaking, and you're going to have, let's say, 1.5 hours every day that's going to be devoted to this project. You can then figure out how many hours you top it up a little bit because there's always stuff that comes up. Now you got an hourly rate and you got your markup supply. So very key thing that you need to know here. We're not done yet. This is, I've gone through all the items, but there's some very key things that you need to understand about markup and margin. We've applied a 30% markup on, I think, just like everything here. So this is our total markup. The profit margin is only 23%. You may be saying, hey, Derek, what the hell's going on here? Hopefully, at this point, you know there's a difference between markup and margin. If you don't, that is typically the difference. And that is why you may be losing money on projects, even though you think your markups are sound. So a 30% markup might sound like a lot, but it's only a 23% margin. Now, you need to go to your bookkeeping and figure out your overhead, run it by the past 12 months. What is your average overhead percentage of sales? So if you spent $15,000 on overhead and you made $1 million, then no, I'm off by a factor of 10 there. So if you spent, let's say, $150,000 on overhead, so this could be your admin, your insurance, all those different overhead costs, that would be 15% of $1 million. And so if you did $1 million in revenue, I'm just keeping the numbers as simple as possible here, that would be 15% overhead. Now, 15% overhead, and then let's say you've got a 5% contingency that we haven't accounted for yet. We've got some miscellaneous in there, but we don't have any contingency in this template. And I would suggest you probably want to put some in. I don't have it in my template, but it's a good idea. But let's say you're considering 5% contingency, you could run, have an overage on this project by 5% of your costs. That puts you at 20% overhead plus contingency. That leaves 3% margin for profit. Now, it's pretty hard to work off 3% profit, and that's still very little margin if anything goes wrong or things take longer, what have you. So this is how, by not knowing your margins and your overhead, you can easily lose money on a project because you might be saying like, oh, 30% markup, I should be making bank, right? Like I should be easily making lots of money. Even if I've got my 50% overhead and 5% contingency, I'm making 10% on this project in profit. You're not, you're making 3%. And that's the difference between markup and margin. Hopefully that's clear. Go grab the template below, check out the description of this video, click through, get this template. I've also got an SOP involved. You get a whole package of estimating assets, resources for you to help you estimate better, more accurately, make more money. Go out there, get it. I'll see you on the next video.